reminds you that you are safe, grounded, and able to choose calmly. This awareness helps you step out of the automatic response of overthinking. When you notice urgency, you can pause instead of obeying it. You can breathe instead of reacting. You can remind yourself that rushing is rarely rooted in truth. By doing this, you create space for clarity to emerge. Clarity does not compete with urgency, it waits. When you quiet the noise of fear, the guidance that was always present becomes easier to hear. Over time, this awareness strengthens your ability to trust your inner wisdom. You begin to see that clarity is consistent, even in uncertainty, while urgency is volatile and exhausting. You learn to follow the voice that brings peace rather than pressure. And as you continue to practice this discernment, you create an inner environment where wisdom can rise naturally, unclouded by the frantic demands of overthinking. Distinguishing between imagined scenarios and present reality begins with understanding how easily the mind can drift away from what is actually happening and step into a future that has not unfolded or a past that can no longer be changed. Overthinking thrives in these imagined spaces. It picks up small concerns and stretches them into entire storylines, weaving possibilities that feel vivid, emotional, and urgent, even though they are not grounded in the moment you are living. These mental projections can be so detailed that they appear real, and yet they exist only in thought, not in truth. The ability to notice this difference is a profound step toward reclaiming your peace. When negative thoughts arise, they often disguise themselves as responsible planning or necessary caution. The mind presents a series of what-if scenarios, each one slightly more dramatic or fearful than the last. You may find yourself imagining conversations that haven't happened, outcomes that have no evidence behind them, or problems that exist only in your mind's attempt to prepare for every possible situation. This habit creates emotional reactions to events that are not occurring. The body tightens, the heart responds, and the spirit feels heavy. Not because something is wrong in the present, but because the mind is rehearsing a future that may never arrive. Recognizing imagined scenarios requires slowing down enough to ask whether the thought is tied to something you're experiencing right now or something you're afraid might happen later. Present reality tends to feel concrete and clear. You can name what is happening. You can see it, touch it, and respond to it. Imagined scenarios, however, feel vague and shifting. They rely on assumptions, predictions, and fears, rather than evidence. They often escalate quickly, moving from a small concern to a large catastrophe without any actual event triggering the rise. By noticing this pattern, you begin to understand that the mind is not always reporting the truth. Sometimes it is simply reacting to fear. Another way to distinguish between imagination and reality is by paying attention to your emotional intensity. Overthinking often generates strong emotions, from anxiety to guilt to panic, even when nothing in your present environment matches those feelings. This mismatch is a clue. Your mind is responding not to the world as it is, but to the world it has created internally. When you pause and look around, you may find that the present moment is much calmer than your thoughts suggest. You might notice that you are safe, that nothing threatening is happening, and that the fear you feel belongs not to the moment, but to the mental story you are entertaining. Your senses can help guide you back to reality whenever imagined scenarios begin to take over. What do you see around you? What do you hear, smell, or feel? These sensory cues pull you out of mental projection and anchor you in the truth of where you are. Imagined scenarios lack this grounding. They exist only in the mind, never in the room around you. The more you practice returning to your senses, the easier it becomes to quiet the mental noise and reconnect with what is real and stable. Understanding the difference between imagination and reality is not about suppressing your thoughts. It is about observing them with enough clarity to see their nature. The mind will always create possibilities. It is part of being human. But not every possibility deserves your belief or emotional investment. When you recognize that a thought is simply a projection and not a fact, it begins to lose its grip. You gain space to breathe, to reflect, and to respond with intention instead of fear. With practice, you start to trust the present moment more deeply, You see that reality, even in uncertainty, is far gentler than the scenarios your mind creates under stress. And as you return again and again to what is true right now, the imagined fears that once felt overwhelming begin to fade, leaving you with a sense of steadiness rooted not in expectation or projection, but in presence. Observing thoughts without labeling them as truth begins with a gentle shift in how you relate to your own mind. Instead of treating every idea, worry, or mental image as a reflection of reality, you begin to see thoughts as events, passing, temporary, and often exaggerated. The mind produces thoughts the way the lungs produce breath, constantly and automatically. Some thoughts are helpful, some are neutral, and some are shaped by old fears or unresolved emotions. When you learn to observe them rather than absorb them, you create space between what you think and what you believe, between the noise in your mind and the truth in your spirit. Most people accept their thoughts as facts without questioning them. If a thought says you're not doing enough, it feels like a verdict. If it whispers something bad will happen, it feels like a prophecy. But thoughts are not mirrors. They do not always reflect reality. They are often influenced by past experiences, insecurities, and emotional patterns that color the present moment. By stepping back and watching thoughts as they arise, you begin to notice their tone, their tendency to repeat, and their habit of appearing with urgency even when nothing is wrong. This awareness helps you recognize that a thought is simply a thought, not a command and not a truth. Observing thoughts means letting them come and go without wrestling with them or trying to silence them. You allow the mind to speak, but you do not let it dictate your identity or your decisions. The moment you stop fighting your thoughts, they lose the power to overwhelm you. You become the witness instead of the participant, the observer instead of the reactor. This shift is subtle but profound. It allows you to feel the difference between a passing worry and a meaningful insight. It helps you recognize when the mind is echoing old fears rather than offering wisdom. One of the clearest ways to practice this is by noticing the emotional charge behind a thought. Thoughts born from truth often feel calm, steady, and grounded, even when they point to something difficult. Thoughts born from fear feel heavy, tight, or urgent. When you notice this emotional energy, you gain insight into the nature of the thought. If it feels frantic, exaggerated, or repetitive, it is likely not truth but a conditioned reaction. Instead of believing it, you observe it with curiosity, allowing it to pass like a cloud moving through the sky. Another helpful approach is to imagine your thoughts as voices in a crowded room. Some voices are wise, some are worried, some are echoes from your past, and some are simply random noise. You do not need to follow every voice you hear. You simply listen, notice, and choose which ones align with the peace and clarity you seek. This inner discernment strengthens over time, and as it does, the mind's fearful narratives lose their authority. You begin to trust your ability to decide which thoughts deserve attention and which ones can be released without engagement. As you observe your thoughts in this way, you may also start to notice familiar patterns. Certain themes may appear during moments of stress or uncertainty. Certain doubts may surface when you step outside your comfort zone. Recognizing these patterns helps you understand that not every thought is a meaningful signal. Some are simply habits the mind has repeated for years. When you see them clearly, they no longer carry the same weight. They become predictable, recognizable, and easier to let go. This practice is not about disconnecting from your mind, but about forming a healthier relationship with it. You learn to honor the mind's ability to imagine, analyze, and create, while also understanding its tendency to drift toward fear. When you observe thoughts without labeling them as truth, you protect your peace. You protect your clarity. You open the door to a deeper wisdom that is quieter than overthinking, but far more reliable. Interrupting spiraling worries with intentional breathing begins with understanding the profound influence of the breath on the mind. When thoughts start racing, when anxieties accelerate, and when your inner world feels like it's spinning out of control, the breath becomes one of the most immediate anchors available to you. Overthinking speeds up your mind, and your breath instinctively follows, becoming shallow, quick, or uneven. This creates a feedback loop where angst, iOS thoughts fuel anxious breathing, and anxious breathing fuels even more anxious thoughts. By intentionally slowing and deepening the breath, you break that loop and create a moment of stillness where clarity can return. The mind often believes it can think its way out of worry, but the body knows better. The breath speaks to the nervous system in a language that thoughts cannot. When you take a slow, steady breath, your body receives a signal that there is no danger, no crisis, no need to prepare for a threat. This message begins to soften the tension in your muscles, lower your heart rate, and quiet the internal alarms that overthinking tends to activate. In this softened state, your thoughts naturally lose some of their intensity. The worry stops spiraling and begins to settle, not because you forced it to, but because you changed the environment it was growing in. Intentional breathing doesn't require anything elaborate. Even a single slow inhale followed by a gentle exhale can interrupt the momentum of spiraling thoughts. You might notice that during moments of stress, your breath becomes trapped high in your chest. Bringing it downward into your abdomen, allowing the belly to expand, helps signal your body to shift out of a reactive state. This physical shift influences your emotional and mental state far more powerfully than most people realize. It creates space to pause, space to observe, space to choose a response instead of being pulled into the storm of overthinking. As you practice breathing with intention, you begin to recognize how quickly the mind can return to a more grounded rhythm. Spiraling thoughts often feel like they have built up too much momentum to interrupt. But the breath is one of the few tools that can reach the mind even when it feels far gone. It gently interrupts the loop without needing to argue with the thoughts or analyze. It offers a reset, a way to step out of the stream rather than be swept away by it. Breathing intentionally also helps you reconnect with the present moment. Spiraling worries tend to pull you into imagined futures or unresolved pasts, but the breath is always happening right now. When you focus on the inhale and the exhale, you are anchored in the present reality, reminding yourself that this moment is manageable, this moment is safe, this moment is far simpler than the stories your mind is constructing. The breath pulls you out of the mental maze and brings you back to what is real and steady. The more you integrate intentional breathing into your daily life, the more natural it becomes to use it during moments of overwhelm. Over time, you may notice that your mind begins to spiral less intensely because it recognizes that you have a reliable tool to bring it back. You may find that you catch the spiral earlier because the body signals the shift sooner. The quickened breath, the tight chest, the rising tension. These cues become invitations to slow down, inhale deeply, and exhale gently. Interrupting spiraling worries with intentional breathing does not require perfection. It simply requires awareness. It invites you to meet your racing thoughts with a grounded body, rather than a reactive one. It helps you shift from panic to presence, from tension to release, from mental noise to inner quiet. And in that quiet, even if only for a moment, you rediscover your capacity to face life with steadiness rather than fear. Re-anchoring yourself in faith, purpose, and inner calm begins with remembering that you are not meant to carry every worry in your own strength. Overthinking often arises from the belief that you must solve everything alone, anticipate every outcome, and protect yourself from every possible disappointment. This mindset places a heavy burden on the mind, pushing it into cycles of fear, doubt, and exhaustion. But when you pause and return to the deeper foundations that guide your life, your faith, your sense of purpose, and the stillness within, you step out of the storm and into a space of trust. This shift does not require perfect circumstances, it requires intention. Faith, in its truest form, reminds you that you are held by something greater than your worries. It invites you to release the illusion of control and rest in the assurance that you are guided, supported, and strengthened. When overthinking clouds your vision, faith becomes a light that cuts through the fog. It tells you that you are not alone, that your path is not determined by fear, and that there is a wisdom at work beyond what your mind can calculate. This doesn't eliminate challenges, but it transforms the way you meet them. Instead of spiraling inward, you lift your gaze. Instead of clinging to panic, you lean into trust. Alongside faith is your sense of purpose, the deeper reason you move, grow, and pursue the life set before you. Purpose grounds you in meaning. It reminds you that your life is bigger than the momentary fears that attempt to dominate your thoughts. Overthinking often narrows your focus to a single problem, making it feel larger than it truly is. When you reconnect with your purpose, your perspective widens. You remember your values, your dreams, the people you love, and the work you feel called to do. This wider view dissolves the tight grip of fear. It gently reminds you that one anxious moment does not define your entire journey. Inner calm is the third anchor, and it is cultivated through stillness. Not the absence of thoughts, but the presence of awareness. When you sit quietly, even for a few breaths, you create space for your spirit to settle. You begin to hear the difference between the frantic voice of overthinking and steady voice of truth. Calm is not passive. It is powerful. It allows you to move through life with a grounded heart, even when circumstances are uncertain. And the more you nurture this inner calm, the more naturally it rises when you need it most. Re-anchoring yourself in these three pillars begins with small moments of returning. When your thoughts begin to spiral, you can gently redirect your attention toward a scripture, a prayer, a phrase that reminds you of God's presence, or simply the quiet assurance that you are guided. When you feel overwhelmed by possibilities, you can recall why you are here, what matters to you, and the direction your heart is leading you. When you feel caught in mental noise, you can close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow your inner calm to rise like a still pool settling after a storm. This practice is not about ignoring your problems, but about approaching them from a place rooted in strength rather than fear. Faith lifts the weight from your shoulders. Purpose reminds you of your direction. Calm steadies your steps. Together they pull you back from the edge of overthinking and into the center of yourself. They help you remember that clarity does not come from forcing answers, but from resting in truth. And as you turn toward these anchors again and again, you begin to trust that no matter how loud the mind becomes, there is a deeper peace always available within you. Redirecting your focus toward actions aligned with peace begins with understanding that overthinking thrives in inactivity. When the mind becomes stuck in loops of fear or uncertainty, it often convinces you that you must keep thinking until you feel safe enough to move. But the truth is the opposite. Clarity often arrives through action, not before it. Taking even the smallest step towards something meaningful interrupts the mental spiral and shifts your attention from imagined problems to grounded, purposeful movement. This shift doesn't require grand decisions. It simply requires choosing an action that aligns with the peace you desire. When you redirect your focus toward peaceful action, you gently guide your mind away from what it cannot control and toward what it can. Overthinking magnifies possibilities, most of them negative, and leaves you feeling powerless. Taking action restores a sense of stability. It reminds you that you are not helpless, that you can influence your environment, your mood, and your inner state through the choices you make. Even small actions, tidying a space, stepping outside, sending a message, completing a task you've avoided, break the stagnation that allows worry to grow. Action brings you back into the present moment, where life is simpler and less thorough than your thoughts suggest. The key is choosing actions that reflect peace rather than panic. When worries build, the instinct is often to respond with haste, trying to fix everything at once. But peaceful action is deliberate, slow, and rooted in clarity. It may mean pausing to breathe, journaling your thoughts, praying, or taking a walk to reconnect with your inner calm. It may mean focusing on one small responsibility instead of mentally juggling 10. These actions may seem modest, but they restore your sense of direction and create space for new insights to rise. They help you realize that peace is not something you wait for, it is something you step toward. Redirecting focus toward peaceful action also helps you separate real problems from imagined ones. When you take a step, you quickly discover whether something truly needs attention or whether it was just amplified by worry. Overthinking blurs that distinction, making every concern feel urgent. Action, however, clarifies. It shows you what is within your control and what is not. It reveals what matters and what does not. It turns vague fears into tangible choices. By doing so, it weakens the power of the unknown and strengthens your confidence in navigating life as it unfolds. As you continue practicing this shift, you may notice that certain actions consistently bring you back to yourself. Some people find peace in movement, walking, stretching, or exercising. Others find it in creativity, writing, painting, or building something with their hands. Others reconnect through service, helping someone, offering kindness, or contributing to a cause. These actions align you with the values that make you feel grounded and alive. They remind you that life is more than the stories in your head. They reconnect you with your purpose and quiet the mental noise that distracts you from it. Redirecting your focus. Outward actions aligned with peace also strengthens your resilience. Each time you choose action over rumination, you teach your mind a new pattern, that you are capable of responding to life without fear guiding you. Over time, this creates a profound internal shift. The mind begins to depend less on speculation and more on experience. It learns that movement brings clarity, that presence brings calm, and that peace grows stronger when nurtured through intentional living. This practice is not about avoiding difficult thoughts, but about transforming your relationship with them. By choosing actions that reflect peace, you show yourself that you are not defined by your worries. You reclaim the authority to guide your attention, your energy, and your direction. You step out of the tangled web of overthinking and into a life shaped by purpose, intention, and quiet strength.